would present the work to the big companies of the world. It was advertising. We were creating, great campaigns for the Hispanic community, but we were presenting and selling that work to mostly an all-white audience of, board members or, the brand managers of these brands. And that's when I understood a lot of, sadly, what I needed to mute in myself and what I needed to almost exaggerate of myself as well because of the work that I was selling and how I needed to come off as authentic to them in the space, but almost paint myself as what they saw and expected of a Latina.
Welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to unraveling the journey of being authentic in the workplace. I'm your host, Sandhya Sudhakar, and today my guest is Jemilly Castro. Jemilly is a VP of Strategy at Remezcla, a media and entertainment company focusing on reaching a Latino audience. They aim to make an impact for both the brands they work with and the communities that they serve. Throughout her career, Jemilly has worked in agencies where she's felt a sense of belonging and others where she hasn't. We talk about some of the biases that she's encountered and how she finds deeper meaning in the work that she does. In this episode, we're talking a lot about purpose and fulfillment in our careers, and Jemilly shares how she practices gratitude to maintain balance in her life, along with taking up some pretty phenomenal personal hobbies. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. Welcome, Jemilly, to Working Your Way. I am really excited to have you here.
I'm really excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while now.
Oh, me too. And I'm really excited to dig into how you're showing up boldly and authentically in your career today. But I want to start by rewinding a little bit and talking about what were those early days of your career like and how were you showing up?
It's interesting. I was really lucky to enter the workforce in a very diverse couple of companies. So the first company I worked with was a Latina-run agency working for the Latina community. At the time, we were all talking about just Hispanic. Now we have various terms for the community. But I was lucky that I had my start in a place that was very much open to the diversity of the world and open to my diversity in the way that I show up. And so it wasn't there that I had my first initial inklings of the differentness that I could bring to a room and how I could push the betterment of the community in white spaces. It was in those client meetings. So I had almost like a shelter in my office, but then we would present the work to the big companies of the world. It was advertising. We were creating, great campaigns. At the time, this was over 20 years ago, for the Hispanic community, but we were presenting and selling that work to mostly an all-white audience of, board members or, the brand managers of these brands. And that's when I understood a lot of, sadly, what I needed to mute in myself and what I needed to almost exaggerate of myself as well because of the work that I was selling and how I needed to come off as authentic to them in the space, but almost paint myself as what they saw and expected of a Latina at that moment.
Wow. So in your agency, you felt like, oh, I can be myself, and you were doing work that was for your community. So I assume that your lived experience was quite welcome in that sense.
Yeah.
And then you have these big brands asking for work that's going to meet the needs of a community that they don't represent, and yet misunderstanding the work or expecting a certain professional, demeanor from you.
Yeah, expecting the stereotype to come through in how I presented the work and also in the work itself. So it was very hard to show up with work that felt authentic to you and to the community that later on would be turned around and said, well, that doesn't feel Hispanic enough. But it was not a Hispanic saying that. So how did they know? It was an interesting place to be in. And I certainly learned quickly how to adjust to those moments. And I will say, when you're young, you're doing everything you can to create a career for yourself and kind of survive in the world. And you want to make sure that, that you don't kind of hinder that in any way. And so I was doing everything I could. You're 24. You're like, yeah, whatever I need to do to get my career up and running and to show up right, I will do. And so automatically, intrinsically, intuitively, you kind of mold yourself to what is needed. I will say that growing up and getting older and maturing as a woman, especially, I've let go of those expectations a lot more. Like however I show up, it is how I'm going to show up now. I don't mold myself for others' expectations, it comes with maturity.
Yeah. And in those days where you were having to kind of mask or to like why you were producing a certain type of work and why it was Latino enough, or kind of having to advocate for what you're an expert in, what was the impact of that on you? Whether that's physically or emotionally or mentally, how did it impact you?
I didn't understand the language for code switching yet. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know that term existed. Maybe it didn't exist back then. But I recognize now that that's what I was doing consistently. And it almost felt like I was just protecting myself in different areas of my work life, personal life. It also made me recognize and be a lot more cynical about life in the US a little bit, like just understanding and separating the corporate me that needed to do what needed to be done. And then in the personal time of myself, just recognizing how everything was just a mess and nobody understood my community and it is what it is kind of thought
Yeah.
process, which was a little defeatist at the time. I think what it did give me is the foundation of I need to change it. Like there was a lot of that came through from those inception days. You did a lot like I did what I had to do in order to get my feet on the ground and get my career started. But it also kind of planted the seed in me of like, then what do you want to do about it moving forward? Like, what is going to be the thing that you do? Because living in the cynicism it didn't feel right for my mental health. So, in a sense, those meetings, those moments kind of started me in the journey of what I did and what I kind of tried to change in the world, in my small world.
Yeah, I think you could kind of take two approaches. One, it's like, I'm going to find a place that welcomes me and accepts
Hmm.
me, or I can change this space so that future people don't have to be masking and code switching and hiding parts of themselves.
Like it plays both ways, right? Be in the space that accepts you, but also be in a place where you can help other people evolve and understand your community and kind of also be open-minded. And I always think about it as like try to connect people to their empathy and realize the bubble they live in, whether it's a white one or a black one or a brown one in any sense, but try to understand the others that are surrounding you and try to sadly help them put themselves in that position so that they can see things through other perspectives.
Yeah, there's certainly an aspect of helping people understand inclusion and diversity through a compassionate approach, which can be taxing in and of itself to say, why can't you just understand why this is not okay? And yet we can get through to people more
Yeah.
effectively oftentimes by like meeting them where they are.
Yeah, both those things, because I also will say I do get frustrated if I have to be somebody's teacher consistently. There's a certain level that I'm willing to go and do for that, and then at a certain point that's your own personal effort. Like that person needs to put in the effort and the understanding and the learning and the time to kind of grow beyond that, because it does get taxing on us to have to teach constantly others how to recognize our struggles and recognize how we grew up and recognize the differentness and how to also celebrate that differentness, right?
Yeah. And so, what were some of those conversations like when you're in front of a big client, a very important client that gives you feedback that, oh, this is
Yeah.
too Latino, this is not Latino enough. And all the while that person doesn't really have any lived experience around it. How did you approach those types of things?
My favorite conversation, I won't name any brands, I won't name any names, but I have had brand managers that have legitimately said, well, so I loved, in this case, it was a TV commercial. I loved the spot and I showed it to our cleaning crew here. And they said that it didn't resonate with them. So I think we need to change it. And it was one of those things that you're like, the misunderstanding of the, like, every Latino is like every other Latino. The misunderstanding of, like, we're not a homogeneous crew. Like, our assignment was for a specific audience in a specific way for a specific product. And then you're assuming every other Latino that you might run into in the world can answer for that audience. There was just a big marketing misunderstanding in that world. It's surprising the lack of kind of like foresight that you see when you get sentiments like that. And unfortunately, those sentiments did have a impact in the work, because there's only so much you can get away with if the client that is asking you to make the changes doesn't agree with your changes. And there's only so much you can convince them. So the work was tweaked to where we felt comfortable with. I will say that throughout the agencies that I've worked in, some have felt more strong about their position. Others have felt more like, let's just do what needs to be done. And so it also depends on the culture of the agency itself.
And I mean, not to mention, if this person works on a big brand in a fairly large organization, the only Latino people they can find was the cleaning crew is highly problematic in and of itself.
It was the janitorial crew, and it was one of those, it wasn't even an intentional thing. The story goes, they were in the elevator with me and I asked them about this and they said they didn't like it. And so that's that. And you're like, well, not every Latino is that represented by that person in your janitorial crew.
Yeah.
But again, it impacted the work minimally. Like, you always try to get that not to impact the work in the ways that it needs to actually reach the results that you are aiming for. But it did impact the work, and it certainly impacted the relationship with that client, because we knew what to do moving forward for that specific person, because we understood a little bit more about them than they did about us. And that kind of taught us a lesson of how to create work for that person and what they were expecting of the work as well.
One of the 3 main signs of burnout, based on the research, is cynicism, which is feeling like your work really doesn't matter. And I can imagine the toll this must have taken on Jemilly in those moments and in those roles. When you're doing great work and a client is dismissing it or diminishing it because they don't understand it. And it can cause us to leave work thinking kind of F that. Over time, what happens is this kind of slow drain of your motivation and your connection to the work and the purpose behind what you're doing. And this can happen even when there's a great manager or a great company culture. In this example, it was how the client was impacting the team's sense of effectiveness and the integrity behind their work. They were probably thinking, okay, now we have to sub-optimize this work just to appease a client who isn't even the person that we're talking to. This is probably one of the most common ways that we can find ourselves on the way to burnout without even realize that's what's going on. Having purpose in your career is so important to motivation and sustainability of your performance. So we're going to come back to this topic a little later in the episode. I'm curious, as someone who identifies as a woman, as a Puerto Rican woman, like, where has it been an advantage or a disadvantage to bring those different parts of your identity forward?
Interesting. I think there are certain moments in time, I think more now than before, that I have felt more comfortable in my skin, bringing those aspects of myself out to, like, again, the code switching is hard to get rid of. It's almost encoded now. If you've been doing it for 10 years plus, and for a lot of that time, you didn't recognize it as code switching, you didn't recognize it as me changing myself to fit into an environment, then it's kind of hardwired. And so it does take a lot more effort for me to be authentically myself. I am very, very happy that now I just am who I am, but it has taken me a while to get here. And so I don't know if back then I would see any positives to it. I think the positives were, like I mentioned, in showing up in spaces where some clients did understand you as the authority for that audience. And so that worked to my benefit. But nowadays, I don't recognize any of those moments in the past as necessarily beneficial. I think there were more hindrances to being who I was back then. Now, I think now, especially in a world where the diversity and inclusion is recognized a lot more as a positive versus a negative, at least hopefully in the circles that I am in, because I do recognize it's still, you know, an isolated space. There are many places where it's not recognized as a good thing, but now it is recognized as a good thing and it is accepted and almost praised. And so I show up in the way that I need to. The distinction, and I would say the different thoughts, the different thinking that I can bring to a room with clients is really welcome and is appreciated by the clients that I work with. And I have noticed a lot of those clients are more diverse in and of themselves, that there are brand managers that are people of color, black, brown, people that will be more willing to understand where you're coming from and to accept it as what it is. And so the landscape has changed a lot. At least I've been lucky that the landscape has changed. And I've also landed in a place where that difference is accepted and recognized, and everybody is on the same boat a little bit.
Yeah. And so as you've gotten older and wiser, more grounded in who you are, confident in your value, how have you brought your authentic self into different elements of your work? What does that look like for you today to show up fully?
Oh, it's funny because, like I mentioned, I think I've landed in a space where it's back to making work for the Latina audience by a Latina audience. And we like to think about it not as for us by us, but by us for everyone, because we do want to spread that word of like what Latina culture is beyond just the Latina audience. But again, I think it does express itself more in front of clients than anywhere else, because I'm back in the space where my colleagues day in and day out are also Latina. And so we bring it almost as a united force when we are out there in front of clients, in front of brands that truly are willing to understand and kind of embrace the community, the Latina community and the Latina culture. And so I feel really supported in those moments because it's not just me alone bringing it. There was a time where I worked in agencies that it was me alone, and I had to advocate a lot for myself and for the work that we were bringing, whether it was meant to be for a Latina audience or not. It felt not reflective of everybody. And so those moments I felt a lot more pressure in saying, well, this is, pardon me, the whitest thing I've ever seen. And so, and you're talking to an audience that, yes, majority white, but increasingly diverse as we go younger in generation and generation. And so I felt the need to be a lot more stringent about it those days. But now I have a support team. Now I have a crew of people with me and behind me, and an agency that supports that way of thinking and that doesn't mold itself towards what the client is asking, but it molds itself towards what the community requires and what the community needs. And so now it's easy. Now it's just natural. Now it feels like I'm finally at a space where I don't have to code switch in front of clients. I don't have to necessarily hold myself back. That also comes with age. I'm a 45-year-old woman that now recognizes I don't need to mold myself to others' expectations, only to myself. And so that also comes through in how I show up in those meetings and in those spaces.
Yeah, there's definitely this element of what I'm hearing in a lot of maybe what you encountered with clients and that is starting to really shift is like this treatment of any kind of ethnicity or group as a monolithic,
Yeah.
group of people that like, okay, if you just take the work and translated into Spanish, you're checking the box, or you're going to pick out the one most stereotypical version of an ethnicity and, cater to that or show that in your advertising. I'm curious. It's interesting too, I think, when you talk about like the world is changing around us, right? We have more representation. You're in a place where the diaspora is more represented. There's better representation in the companies of your clients, of the brands that you're working with. And then there's this generational impact, right? Gen Z is like, we're here and we're not going to be anything other than ourselves. And I think there's been a little bit of a spillover effect that us as, millennials or, elder millennials or whatever have kind of been able to grab onto too. It's like this big convergence of all these different elements.
It's funny you say that generationally, and I'm a proud Gen Xer, but I identify as an elder millennial. I sometimes even identify as a Gen Zer. My job is, as a strategist, my job is to understand generations and search and communities and just to get what they're saying and why. And so there's a lot of aspects of me that, because of the trends of the world, I understand generations in a different way than someone not working in this industry would, right? But the world around us is changing. Surprisingly enough, it also that exuberance that we show and that willingness to be ourselves, especially in Gen Z, means that those that don't agree with us are putting extra pressure. Those that don't necessarily want to accept those changes in a community, in a generation, or a community being who they truly are in the world of, the America, US, really the US, not America. I hate calling it America because America is so much more than just the US. But anyways, in the US, those people will try to put pressure against that movement because of what their belief structure is and what they think the US should be. And so as vocal as we are, there's always the pushback. And so you constantly have to understand and keep kind of your goalpost visible to yourself and understand what you're doing. And because the other side, that's a horrible way of saying it, but those that don't agree with you will always be just as vocal as you are as well. In rooms, and it'll happen in corporate rooms, it'll happen in meetings, and it'll happen in the larger stages of life as well, in personal life. You do what you can in every moment so that you can show up and still be as authentic as possible. And again, because of the life that I've had and my background and the maturity level, I think every 40-plus-year-old woman will attest to this. You just feel that much more valid, and you care a lot less about what others will think about you at a certain point in time. You understand what you're bringing to the table so much more that whenever you receive that pushback, you are able to remain authentic and push yourself into that space regardless of what they think.
Yeah. So I would love to hear, what is it about you and the person that you are and the talents that you bring to the table that makes you really great at what you do?
Innately an extremely curious person. I like to dissect things way too much. I've always been. As I remember thinking back on my youth, how it felt so natural to just be inquisitive about everything. And now that's like a key thing to my day-to-day job. Like if I'm not curious about how the world works, then I'm not going to be able to really understand a brand's problem and a community in depth and pose the best kind of like way of those two things coming together. I will say that, the curiosity, the openness, the kind of like thirst for knowledge, those are things that are integral to being a strategist, at least from my point of view. I also love collaborating and talking things through with people, like kind of breaking things down, building them back up. And I think that's also integral to being a strategist. My job title and my job position is one of those odd ones that people don't understand out in the world unless you're in it. And so you can say, well, I'm a strategist. And they're like, what is that? What does that mean?
What do you do?
So, what do you do exactly? And a lot of people that are in politics will be like, oh, like a political strategist. And I'm like, well, they have the same job. They kind of figure out what needs to be done and put forth a strategy of how to get it done, right? But I do it for brands and I do it for communities and not necessarily to sway votes. So that's,
Yeah.
yeah. Although you could say marketing is almost like you vote with your money. So yeah, it is. But yeah, like if you think about it in those terms, it's really about researching, understanding communities, understanding brands, and kind of mapping out the best way where that brand, I like to think about it, how that brand can truly help communities. So I think I put my efforts towards having the brand truly be impactful to the community versus just trying to sell something to a community. And that in and of itself will guarantee, if the brand keeps that up, will guarantee that the brand lives and is able to kind of have harmony with the world. I know it sounds odd because ultimately I am trying to sell things to people, but I try to make it more important than just selling, make it about, the community benefiting as well as the brand.
Feeling like your work has meaning is incredibly important. What I mentioned before about burnout and cynicism is so relevant here. We have to feel emotionally connected to our work in some way to perform at a high level sustainably. That doesn't always have to be with the product that you sell. It can be connection to the people that you work with or emotional fulfillment from the way that you get to use your brain at work every day. It's something that holds meaning to you, and this is a really personal thing. What's meaningful to you isn't necessarily the same thing that's meaningful to someone else, and it's really about identifying what you truly care about and figuring out if there's a way to connect your work to that. Now, Jemilly admits here that she's ultimately selling things, but she views it through a lens of helping companies and brands as this kind of mutually beneficial relationship with the communities that Remezcla is trying to serve. I interviewed a friend once for a little market research project that I was working on, and I remember how she described the most satisfying part of her job. She worked in a high-level role for a company that sold a service to other companies, a type of consulting. The thing that was most fulfilling to her about what she did, though, it wasn't the service or even her own team. It was seeing how she could help the person that she was working directly with at the client company grow their career through the results that she could help them deliver in their role using her company's services. I also coached a woman once who worked for a biomedical engineering firm, and the company did something really smart. They would bring in end user patients to their annual meetings so that employees could hear directly from the patient about how their product impacted and improved their life. And we don't often get to see that connection to the end user of our work when we work in a corporate job. I think this can be reapplied in a lot of ways. And I mentioned changing your mindset around the work you do a couple of times as it relates to job crafting. It's all about what the outcomes you care about really are and how closely you can connect them. There are real impacts to engagement and fulfillment in your work if you can do that. Let's get back to the conversation with Jemilly and talk about what makes her so great at what she does. You mentioned your curiosity being something that it makes you really great at what you do. I'm curious, has there ever been a time, maybe in your career or outside of your career, that you've been maybe given negative feedback about your curiosity or like where it's been treated as a bad thing?
Yes, many times. Mostly because, especially when I was a junior person kind of growing up in the industry, there's a lot that is just like, just do it. Just get it done. Don't ask questions. Just do what I asked you and do it how I asked you. And don't necessarily think about it too much. Just get it done. And I will say those moments in time, that was when you said, okay, I'll get it done, but I'll also think about it on my own time and on my own terms. And I'll try to figure out how to integrate my thinking into the end result that you need, because I'm never going to quash that person. It's just natural to me to ask questions and be like, and question everything in life. Like I question it. Why? It is very annoying. And I do question a lot. And I come up with some of the oddest conversations in the world because I question, well, why is it that way? Like from a personal note, I had my sister who is a business owner. I went through a whole, like, just literally a TED talk in front of her saying, like, yeah, but we invented the 40-hour work week. We invented Monday through Friday work. And, yes, because Saturday is a religious day for some people, Sunday is a religious day for others, we work during these days. But who is to say that that is how it needs to work? And a lot of people take all those things for granted. And I'm like, no, why? Like, we are the society and we invented it. Why can't we change it?
Yeah.
Period. Like, why can't we change it for the better? I don't think a lot of people think like that day in and day out. And it has been one of those things that I've had to adjust myself to my managers and superiors when I was, just a peer or just a junior person and learning the ropes. But I never dismissed it internally, even if it stopped me from saying those things in front of them, because I knew it would have a negative effect of what they were expecting. I still did the work internally and put my curiosity into the output, the deliverable, whatever it was that I needed to give them. I still did it with those. I tried to answer those questions for myself, basically.
Yeah, without their buy-in, because they clearly didn't value why you might have been asking those questions.
Well, they were thinking efficiency more than anything, right? They were thinking, let's get this done quickly. And I'm thinking, well, hold on, pause, let's think about it more. And let's arrive at the right solution versus just jumping into our automatic solution for everything. Like there was always a moment in time where I think we could go back and say, but let's study this for like a half second more. Because truly in marketing, the biggest time you should spend is figuring out, well, what is the actual problem you need to solve in the world or for this product if you're thinking small, right? What is the problem we need to solve? And that should get the majority of your time and thinking. The solution should be natural if you figure out the right problem. And so I always want to spend time in the problem. And a lot of people just would rather spend time in the solution and get it done quickly.
Yeah, I think there's also, especially in a workplace or when with some kind of like hierarchical structure, an element of like, if I'm asking questions, I'm challenging your authority or I'm challenging your knowledge or I'm arguing with you or whatever, right? And I've had that come up for me, both professionally and personally, where I'm like, I'm not arguing with you. I'm trying to understand, right?
That's the number one thing. And it's so funny that you say that because I think automatically the stereotype that comes through, not just for Latina women, but for all people, like women of color, is that we tend to be a little bit more combative. We tend to be a little bit more questioning. And I think that's just sadly an unconscious bias in others, that anything we say with conviction is an attack. and anything we say that diverges from what you're saying as the other person in that conversation is an affront and is like, it's not constructive, basically. I've been told many times, it's funny, I've had managers that have both told me, you're too nice and you need to stop that and you need to fight more for things. And I've had managers tell me, you need to be less combative. And I have been myself throughout all those journeys. So it's always about the person on the other side of that. And I've had moments specifically with those managers, the one that told me to be not as nice. I've told him when I have been not as nice, which wasn't mean at all. Several people have called me to complain. Several people have told me, you need to be better. This is me in a position of power. I was a director at that moment in time. And it was still shocking to see, well, I wasn't being at all disrespectful or mean or rude. I was just being assertive. And in the other cases where I've been told to be nicer, same conditions apply. I wasn't being rude, but it's funny how you have to navigate through those perceptions. And it's amazing, I think, for all women, how we've still arrived. I think I look at you, I look at myself, I look at our group of friends, my group of friends, and how we were still not beaten up by it. Like we're still fighting and we're still saying no. We're still saying, no, I'm going to show up as I show up. I'm still treating people with respect. And that's what matters. And I wish the same for people. And I've seen it not only in myself. I understand very much the privilege that I have because I have very light skin. I understand my privilege. And not only that, but I bleach my hair blonde. So very much rare that you would find someone saying, well, that's a Puerto Rican, just because of the way I look. And so I've been also in conversations where I have been told about other people of color in the same company that I am in. And I've been told, well, that person is just, they're so aggressive. And I'm like, no, they're not. I don't know what you're seeing. I was in the same conversation with you and they were not aggressive at all. And so I've been given the role of backing up other people in the view of white people's perception of that person. And it's like, no, like, I don't know what you're seeing. That person was not rude. They were voicing an opinion, and your unconscious bias is unfortunately talking for you. And you need to recognize that. And just because they are a person of color, they were not being rude or combative. It's amazing how much that has happened in my life, especially not in the position that I'm now, but in the previous positions and jobs that I've had where I've been in a predominantly white space. That because I am very light skinned, I am also seen as kind of a person I can say these things to.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I'm gonna say the thing behind the curtain
Say the
that I would
thing. Say the
say.
thing.
And you're like, whoa. I'm not gonna agree with you.
I don't think the same. So let's backtrack and let's learn a little bit from this moment.
Yeah. And it is an example of where we all, no matter what our social identity, can use our privilege to help drive change. There's certainly, while I am a woman of color, like Asian Americans in the workplace have a lot more privilege than many other minoritized communities. And so there are ways that we also can do that work as well. So
and as a very light-skinned Hispanic Puerto Rican, and as a bilingual, I think fluently being able to express myself in English is a privilege, I think. And so also being there to advocate for those that can't is something that I wish I could do more of, because oftentimes your intelligence is diagnosed by whether or not you can speak English. And that bothers me incredibly, even though I'm a big advocate for like the idea that Hispanics don't have to know Spanish or English, or like you can be who you are regardless of the language you speak. I do find that people that don't speak English as well or have a heavy accent are judged incredibly strongly, and they are judged for their intelligence level, which has nothing to do with speaking English. So that's also a place where if I'm out in the world and I see someone trying to communicate, I've always been kind of a person to unfortunately butt in and help kind of express whoever needs the help in English. I will give it, because it is unfortunately where you see a lot of issues in communication and in the unfairness of the world when you can't speak the language in this country.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what are some of the tools that you have in your life, tools, resources, communities, the work that you've done on yourself as a human that have gotten you to a place of feeling really grounded and confident in who you are?
Therapy.
I hear that one a lot on this podcast.
Therapy, finding a really, really good therapist is instrumental. I think, especially for the others in this world, the people of color, hopefully you can find a therapist that's also a person of color and that understands where you're coming from. And that can guide you through, they're not going to solve anything for you, but they can certainly guide you through how to understand yourself better and how to position yourself in the world to be confident, comfortable with yourself, and care less about the people that don't matter. because you're never going to change everyone's minds. And so you can't take that pressure on yourself to satisfy everyone. Therapy. And I also, this is a lesson I'm still learning. I need to practice more gratefulness. I need to be grateful for the things that I do have and for the life that I have and for the moments of time that I'm able to spend with people that I love. I need to be grateful for all the wonderful things in my life and not focus on the negative aspects of it. And I think that has helped at least me a lot. And I try to journal those things, not just think about the gratefulness, but I try to write it down. And I try to remember that whenever I'm feeling down or low, I'm like, go read that grateful book, because there are things there that you should remember right now. And that'll power me through many, many times. I used to have, in one of my positions, I've been really lucky, again, practicing gratefulness. I've been really lucky to not only have had great mentors, I've had amazing mentors, but I've also been able to mentor people. And in the struggles of day in and out corporate life, which is just a weird thing we've made ourselves rely on as humans.
The 40-hour work week. Yeah.
The
What
40
does it mean
work week,
anyway?
again, what does it really mean? And why do we have to
Yeah.
work for 40 hours? It's just such an odd thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, I don't want to digress too much, but I've been able to help others in moments like that. And I have oftentimes forced people that I'm mentoring, I'm like, sit down right now and let's write 3 things that you feel really proud of that you did this week at work. Because oftentimes you do feel demotivated by the things that go wrong. And you do have to sit and say, wait, I did this thing. And even if it's a small win, it is powerful. And it makes a difference in your mindset. If you remember, I was able to do this, I was able to do this and this. And even if those 3 things are tiny, they're still amazing. And they can change the course of your whole day and your whole week. Mentally, like just feeling good about the work that you do. I have to do that often because I'm in marketing, and being the curious person that likes to break things down and kind of investigate the world, I see my job and my world and my day in and day out is very superficial, just because the world is so much more vast and there are so many things that I could be doing to help it, right? And I am in a very consumer centric kind of world, and I myself am in charge of oftentimes making people purchase things or think to purchase things or reminding them, hey, you need this. And so I have to constantly mentally understand the positive that I have done in my day in and day out so that I can feel better about the work that I do, better about the impact that I'm having on the world, even if it is small, but it is powerful. So I remind myself of those moments in time where I've mentored others into being grateful, into seeing the positive that you've done in the day and seeing the small wins that you've been able to accomplish. And so I try to focus on the positive, and that has helped me a lot in my mental health journey and in my work-life balance journey.
Having a gratitude practice can help in a lot of ways. Studies show that it helps us increase dopamine and serotonin and reduce cortisol, the stress hormone, and also build up resilience to negative emotions. All of this results in improvements to our physical, our mental, and our emotional health, and improvements in our social connections and relationships. There are a lot of ways to incorporate a gratitude practice. You can find a way to work it into your routine. You could keep a gratitude journal or start a daily writing practice. At the beginning or the end of your day, you could write down 3 things that you're grateful for. You could do a short guided meditation on gratitude, and you can find a lot of these on free apps like Calm or Insight Timer. Or you could call or text a loved one and tell them one reason that you're grateful for your relationship with them. You could even stand in the mirror and tell yourself what you're grateful for about yourself. I'll share a little bit more about gratitude in the wrap up. There's so many different things that when we think about impact, it goes so far beyond you are helping brands sell more. It's,
Yes.
You're helping meet the needs of a community. You're mentoring people. You're influencing change in the way that people think about people of color at work. Like there's all these other parts of our work that are very purposeful, outside of just like the one kind of KPI that we're
Yeah,
delivering.
exactly. Exactly. And if I focus too much on that one thing, then potentially it can spiral into some dark spaces. But like you said, as I've matured and grown, I've seen all the other ripple effects of the work that I do. And not only that, the ripple effects of me supporting others that are doing great work. And so that has kept me in a positive space and understanding the value of me showing up because it does have an impact beyond just the little things that I'm able to do.
So I'd love to hear from you. You're someone that I know to have a very amazing, full life. And career is just one part of that. And so I would love to hear, how has the role of work or career as a part of your life shifted over time? And what does it look like
Oh,
today?
ooh. I grew up thinking my career was going to define me. I grew up thinking what I do in order to get money, what I do as a job is integral to me being seen as worthwhile. And I grew up with that intent. I was very much, I wasn't like an A student, but I was very much focused on getting to a place where I was financially stable, not only financially stable, but also like appreciated for the type of position that I carried and for the work that I did, and that others around me, to more than anything my family, could be proud of what I had accomplished. And that, I mean, it got me to where I am, and I'm very grateful for that way of thinking. But I've also recognized that your career isn't your life and that it can't necessarily be the one and be all defining aspect of your personality. And so once I realized that, I started to be that person that has a bajillion hobbies, and fueled by my curiosity to break everything down, I now have way too many things that I do, and I've supplemented my life beyond my career. And like I think that has given a lot more, that has made me more proud than my career. That has made me so much prouder. The things that I do outside of my work personally has made me really proud. I do see others reacting positively to a title change and a career change and a company change more than I think I do personally. I am very proud of the fact that I am a scuba diver now, and I do pottery, and I take care of many plants, and that I have recently started getting into fountain pens, and I try to write a lot more versus use a computer to express myself.
Mm.
Um, I'm proud of those things and the things that I've learned outside of marketing so much more than my title of VP. Not to say that I'm not proud of my title and the work that I do day in and day out, but I personally see everything else as so much more powerful. Like the diversification of my own knowledge base and my exploration in the world and my traveling, that has really fulfilled me versus my job title. But I do see people being pressed by the title still. And I'm glad that young me did everything she could to make that happen.
And I'm excited to learn some more about fountain pens from you.
Oh my God. So wait till I show you my collection of incredible ink because I fill them myself. And now I have a whole other, I've unlocked a whole level of creativity that I never thought I could have. And it's legitimately just pens and beautiful ink and expressing myself, even if it is a note, a to-do list, or a grocery list. It's beautifully written. It's
I
beautifully
love
expressed.
that. And that I think
So
is
stupid.
actually a really cool connection back to gratitude, right? In
Yeah.
like savoring these little
Yes.
basic, I'm using air quotes, basic moments in our day and making them feel really luxurious or nurturing in a different way.
It's true. It's all of those little things that you can do that add joy to a moment. Like I said, even if it's writing down my to-do list for the week, but I get to do it with a beautiful pen and beautiful ink. And I enjoy that so much more than just your typical to-do list on my phone. I just do. And so I'm always looking for the next thing that I will learn about and kind of dive into. I'm a big video gamer now. So that's surprising in and of itself that I love video games and I play them often,
Yeah.
and there's this whole community in the world there that I'm learning about. And so we'll see.
Mhm.
I like diversifying myself and my personality, and I think that has brought me a lot more joy than my career path or my title or what I've been able to accomplish there. So I think it's what it does enable. So my career path and my job title does enable me to have all these great hobbies,
Yeah.
especially diving. Scuba diving is expensive. And so I am grateful for that career and
Yeah.
that career path and that journey. And again, I'm very grateful to young me for being so intent on being financially stable, because she did things that I don't think I could do now. She put so much of herself. It's weird that I'm talking about myself in that sense, but she put so much of her spirit and her
Yeah.
joy and her time. I look back and I barely had free time when I was young, but that enables me now to kind of explore so many different aspects of my personality and really be balanced in how I approach my work life. And so I'm very grateful to that young me that had to struggle through all of those odd meetings and being typecast, as well as being stereotyped, as well as being, too loud or too friendly or too nice or not friendly enough, because she got me here. So
That is a really beautiful note to end on. I want to thank you for being on, really, truly.
thank you.
It's been lovely hearing about your journey. And I think, we can have these big goals in our career, and we also can think about what else in our lives they can enable. And
Yeah.
I think you illustrated that really amazingly well just now, in terms of like getting to a certain place enables you to now
Yeah.
have these other things and these hobbies and these interests. And also, I guarantee those things are making you better at your job also.
I would think so too. That's how I think so too. And also, like, one last thought, because I can't forget about this. Give yourself grace, and you make mistakes, and that's fine. And I have learned to love the mistakes that I made because they have taught me a lot. And so also forgive yourself in those moments in time where you weren't as great as you thought you could be, and move forward and be better next time for yourself and for others. I think that's also powerful in being and in practicing gratefulness. You have to recognize where you failed at it and how you can be better, I think.
Beautiful. And self-compassion is the
Yes.
key to all of it.
Yes. Yes.
After Jemilly and I stopped recording, we had a little mini friend therapy session, because there have been a couple times that I've been told that I'm pushy or confrontational or combative. One of them was actually fairly recently, where the other person wanted to take absolutely zero responsibility for his side in the communication. And this happens often when people carry unconscious biases about the way women, or especially women of color, should communicate. When I'm direct, or I'm trying to drive clarity in a conversation where expectations are unclear, I can be perceived that way. And it just feels really good to talk to someone who gets you. I'd encourage all of you listening to never struggle alone with these things. There are so many people out there who have experienced similar things to the things that you might be going through. And even though it doesn't solve the issue, it's really good for our emotional well being to connect to other people who see us and hear us and understand us. Now, in this episode with Jemilly, we talked about these different chapters in her career, in places where she felt like she belonged and some where she didn't. And we talked a lot about how we can find meaning in the work we're doing. And when we don't, it can lead us to emotional burnout and cynicism in our careers. And this is something I would encourage everyone to do proactively. Really think about what matters to you and the elements of your work that feel fulfilling. I'll include the link to a podcast episode with Emily and Amelia Nagoski about burnout and how we can reduce our stress in simple ways. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of obsessed with Jemilly's new love of collecting fountain pens. I think simple pleasures in life are absolutely the best. So, I shared a little bit more about gratitude in the episode, and I want to share a couple of resources for that. One is an article about the neuroscience of gratitude for any of you fellow psych nerds. And the other one is an article with 8 simple but different ways that you can incorporate gratitude into your day. And remember that these type of practices don't have to be complicated. They can be really simple and you can start anywhere. If you commit to a daily practice and you miss a day, that's okay. Just get back to it the next day versus beating yourself up and abandoning it altogether. Most new habit formation is more about the recovery than the perfection or rigidity in doing it in the first place. So focus on progress and not perfection and see how it makes you feel.